a while. And for those of you asking what I've been doing in my absence, well, I have a job. I know, it's shocking to think somebody's not out here desperately trying to pursue YouTube full-time. But just so you know, my day job for the last several years has still involved television and films, just in a totally different way. See, for the last 5 years, I've been a closed caption editor, and have added subtitle editing to that in the last couple of years as well. And that has led me to put my hands on some pretty wild moments of television, film, and anime.
Barack Obama, it will almost be an honor to kill you.
We had some stumbles along the way, but we pulled it together. We made it home.
I hate you.
Wow, really thought that one would work.
Oh, Linda. Sleep in heavenly
Ever since this became my job, I have closed captions turned on for just about everything I interact with, be that television, movies, or even video games. And actually, I want to talk about video games for a bit, because I feel like gaming is one area that seems to be moving in the right direction as far as accessibility is concerned, but one area that's really bugged me has been closed captions. Maybe you know the struggle. You play some game and you turn on either closed captions or subtitles, whichever word they're choosing as a blanket description for two very different things, and then the captions or subtitles pop up and they're so small. I mean, just ridiculously small. And there's so many words on screen. They just let a whole tiny, hard-to-read paragraph of text sit on the screen and call it accessibility. But every so often, a game actually manages to handle closed captions kinda sorta well. And when a game does it right, it probably deserves to be highlighted. So, I don't know if this is gonna be, like, a regular thing I do or not, but as a professional closed caption and subtitle editor, I thought I'd take a look at video games and see how they're handling their closed captions and subtitles, to see if what they're providing is a win in terms of accessibility. Let me start by describing the difference between subtitles and closed captions. I suppose if you're just talking about what's being transcribed word for word, we're at a point where subtitles just gets thrown around all the time for the whole shebang. But subtitles will also include translated text from the original language into your target language. Like, you can play a game like Lost Judgment in Japanese and see the game translated into English in order to experience it in your own native language. Okay, so those are subtitles.
Yo, Tavo. 何? 暇だな。まあね。
But you could also play Lost Judgment with the English dub turned on, and there will be a transcription of the dub's choice of words and phrases here, which aren't exactly the same as the more literal Japanese translation. I'd typically call a transcription of your own language closed captions, but people just toss the word subtitles around here all the time, and whatever, I think we all know what you mean.
Hey, Talk.
What?
Man, I'm bored.
Sucks.
But for certain, you end up getting into closed caption territory when you start adding in sound descriptions intended to aid the deaf and hard of hearing. So if there's some explosion happening off screen, if you don't have any hearing impairment, you probably don't need the captions to tell you that something just blew up while the character wasn't looking. But if you are deaf or hard of hearing, it may help for the text to indicate that, hey, something just went boom over there, and that's why a bunch of people are looking that way now. So once you start seeing these audio descriptions pop up, that's when you know for sure you've wandered into closed caption territory. And for the most part, I don't really see video games utilizing audio descriptions for sounds and music and stuff like that. I can only think of a couple of games off the top of my head that you can turn this feature on for. But I do want to talk about one game that does give you that option. Since this is my first time doing this, I thought I'd start with a short game that was easy to play all the way through and talk about. So I reinstalled the first Portal game for PC on Steam. Now, there have been other releases, of course, even most recently on the Nintendo Switch, and those options and interfaces may look different than the version I played through. I was actually immediately impressed by what was available on the options menu. Under the audio tab, there's a drop-down menu for captioning options, And it's here where you have the option of no captions, closed captions, or subtitles, dialogue only. So naturally, I wanted to see what the choice of closed captions gave us, because it's so rare to see subtitles blatantly distinguished from closed captions. And right away, the captions are doing exactly what they're supposed to do. Peppy music is described, meaning the music coming out of the radio as you wake up inside your lab room at Aperture Science. And that's a good start, but sometimes the audio descriptions are kind of weird. Like, the very next sound effect is door sound. Well, okay, I guess that indicates that a door is either opening or closing, but what does a door sound like exactly? Well, that's gonna depend on the kind of door you're talking about. If you're talking about a door in some old house, it might creak open. Or if you're talking about a big metal door, it might clang shut. And in the case of Portal, this door is some kind of super futuristic tech, and it has sort of a whooshed closed. I think describing the sound effect accurately helps to let the player know what kind of environment they're actually immersed in. It might not be something you think about too hard if you can actually hear everything happening in this scene, but it might be important to somebody out there. So finally, your main antagonist, GLaDOS, starts speaking to you, and we can really start getting into the meat of what choices they made with their captioning decisions.
Hello, and again, welcome to the Aperture Science Computer Aided Enrichment Center. We hope your brief detention in the relaxation vault has been a pleasant one.
So right away we can see they've chosen to write sound effects in white, and when GLaDOS is speaking, all of her text is in light red. That's an interesting distinction because I've never been in a situation when writing captions for television or streaming platforms where I've been asked to change the color of the text depending on whether someone is speaking or whether I'm using sound effects. I've only ever seen something like this happen in anime and tokusatsu fan subs.
相当やばいやつだね。
俺が思いっきりどついたら飛び出すかもしれん。
バカ野郎、そんなことしたら亮太郎がぶっ壊れるだろうが。
落ち着いて考えたらいいアイディアが浮かぶかもしれませんよ。
I don't personally prefer it, but it's not terribly distracting, and who knows, maybe it's actually helpful to someone, although you may have to take into consideration the possibility that your players could be colorblind. If game developers are going to go this route, adding in the option to choose your text colors or to have a colorblindness mode for your captions and subtitles might not be such a bad idea. The problem I do have, though, is that this font is really, really small. It's great that it sits on this darkened, translucent background, but it still has the tendency to sort of blend into the world around you and is a little on the difficult side to read. If we're talking about captioning for TV and movies, depending on your platform, you may be restricted to having only between 32 to maybe 42-ish characters in a single row of text, with up to 2 or maybe 3 rows on screen at a time. And the font is gonna be nice and big and readable. This game can have about 110 characters in a single row of text, and if GLaDOS is feeling really talkative, it might be a couple lines long. And this is just an incredibly common problem throughout gaming history. Text is way too small, it's too hard to read, and there's too much of it on the screen at any given point in time. Now, I can't rag on it too hard because there is another element of these captions that I actually think was a great decision, and that's that when GLaDOS speaks, her captions are italicized. Now, this is often a decision made in television and streaming in order to distinguish the fact that the speaker is not actually in the room, or that something is playing over a speaker or a radio somewhere. And that's actually true of GLaDOS for 90% of the game. You don't see her until you get all the way to the very end, so when you hear her speaking, you can tell it's coming over like a PA system or something. So Valve's caption editors made the right decision here in having her speech written in italics. What's interesting is that by the time you do get to the end of the game and you see GLaDOS for yourself, the italics don't change. Of course, you could make the argument that this is because she's a robot and she's probably speaking through some speaker system anyway, so maybe keeping her in italics is fine. So as you're walking through the game and solving puzzles, the game actually does a really good job of popping closed captions in when various sounds are happening around you. This really impressed me, to be honest. The captions even tell you whether you've shot a blue portal or an orange one. Mind you, I don't really know what the colors blue and orange actually sound like, but it is kind of helpful. I like that it tells you that if you fired one portal, the previous portal you've shot fizzles out. That's a fantastic audio description. Cubes dropping are described as metal clang, and that's pretty good too. But descriptions like button activated and button deactivated are a little funny because we don't know what a deactivation sounds like. The sounds that actually happen in the game are actually beeps and buzzes, but that's not what the audio descriptors say, so I think those could have been improved. The same with elevator start. Well, we can tell the elevator started because the room is kind of bouncing around and the lights are shifting, though I don't know why. It's not like there's any windows in the elevator. So really the description should be about the sound the elevator itself is making. Maybe it's whirring or rumbling or even humming. Descriptions like fluorescent light hum, however, are pretty good. It's just kind of interesting to see some things that are good descriptions of the noises that are actually being made, and other things that you could figure out just by sort of looking around the room. A good rule of thumb that has been instilled in me was that if you could see the action happening on screen, you don't necessarily need to caption it. Like if you see a guy fire a gun, you see the bullet leave the barrel, and even see the muzzle flash, then you don't need to describe the sound of gunfire. After all, your audience is hard of hearing, but you don't want to assume they're stupid. So if you're just gonna say elevator start instead of elevator humming or something, maybe just don't even describe the sound at all, since we can tell the elevator is moving anyway. Another interesting decision popped up when firing the main portal, where it's described as portal gun primary fire. I'm not super thrilled with that description, but on top of that, for whatever reason, they started deciding that this action would be presented in yellow font rather than white or red. And it's not the only audio description that looks like that. If you try to fire the gun onto some surface that doesn't accept portals, the game buzzes at you to let you know you can't put a portal there. The audio description of this action is can't use. If I'm deaf or hard of hearing, then what the f does can't use sound like? The actual answer to that question would maybe be something like a negative buzzing or something to that effect. I don't know, you could probably workshop that. But I have no idea what the sound of can't use is all on its own. Also, I just think the decision to make a couple of these sound effects display in yellow was just sort of unnecessary. The distinction between white and red kind of made sense, but I don't really see how the distinction between white and yellow makes any difference. They're still sound descriptions. I don't know, I thought that one was kind of weird. One thing the game did not do was indicate when the soundtrack changed. There are some pretty big chunks of the game where there's no background music playing at all, so I didn't think much of it. But then you get to certain stages, and the soundtrack clearly wants to make you feel a certain way. There'll be some slow, moody music, or as you near the end of the game, the music ramps up and makes you start to feel kind of panicked as you're trying to escape the facility and not die. But the closed captions never describe when these musical changes happen. If this was for TV or film, you might see something pop up like dramatic music, or unsettling music, or percussive music, or, whatever actually fits the mood of the music that's playing at that moment in time. This game does none of that. You pretty much only get the description of the peppy music coming out of the radio you find throughout the game, and that's about it. I think that's a whole element of the game lost to players who otherwise can't hear it. There's a mood the game developers wanted you to feel, and there's a whole chunk of audience that might have that feeling lost because the captions don't address it. And then we get to the talking turrets, and the turrets are really funny. Like, they're cute, and all they want to do is murder you, so you gotta murder them, but you feel kind of bad about it because they're kind of cute. Well, anyway, so the turrets talk, and in the captions, they also talk in italicized speech, but now their text is colored in this, peachy yellow-orange color. I don't know, I guess they just wanted to differentiate between GLaDOS' speech and turret speech, but it's another thing that feels like it could be an issue if you happen to run into a player trying to play Portal who happens to also be colorblind. All these multicolored choices for multiple speakers and different kinds of sound effects, while well-intended, could actually end up backfiring. Another really funny thing about them is that the things the closed captions say they're saying aren't always the same as what they're actually saying out loud. Like, the turrets only have so many commands to say, hello, are you still there, good night, that sort of thing. So the game just sort of picks those lines at random. Unfortunately, the audio it's randomly picking is completely different from the captions it's randomly picking, so they just don't line up at all half the time.
Are you still there? Resting.
And now we introduce a new kind of sound effect.
Critical error.
Turret death. Written in bright red. Turret death isn't a sound effect. Why is this here and why is it in bright red? Man, can you believe they gave you a sound effect for turret death, but not for when you euthanize your companion cube? It's the consistency of it, you know? But you know what they do give you a sound effect for? Your own death. And what does Valve seem to think death sounds like? Death. Got it. Dying sounds like death. Yeah, that really clears that one up. Couldn't have otherwise figured out I was dead on my own. Thanks, Valve. Oh, but man, I love this one. You're near the end of the game, you're off of GLaDOS' rails, you're running about the abandoned Aperture building all on your own with no guidance. Suddenly, rocket launchers have been set up around the building, and if they go off and hit the wall... explosion! The sound effect is so good in a really, really terrible way. Explosion! Italics! All caps! Exclamation mark! The sound effect has it all. Really delivering the importance of how dire your situation is if you are anywhere near this rocket launcher. Frankly, no. They did not need to italicize it, they did not need to put it in all caps, and it did not need the exclamation mark. But I'm almost willing to give it a pass because of the sheer urgency this caption editor decided the rocket launcher created. You finally reach the end of the game, and you start taking pieces off of GLaDOS and throwing them into a fire, and the way she speaks sort of changes. And what the closed captions give us are an entire 2 sentences describing the change in her voice.
That has got to be the dumbest thing that. Whoa. Good news.
The voice has subtly changed. Smoother, more seductive, less computerized. And 1, you shouldn't use 2 sentences to describe this change happening. This is written like it was taken out of the recording script for the actor's sake. You could write this in any number of ways for the sake of closed captions, like maybe changes to sultry voice, and just leave it at that. I don't know, it doesn't have to be that exactly, because captions are sometimes more of an art than a science, but also, it would have helped if the captions at any point before now had notated that GLaDOS was speaking like a robot in the first place. So you've notated that she changed from sounding robotic to sounding less robotic, but you never told us she sounded like a robot in the first place. So if you're hard of hearing and didn't know she sounded like a robot, I guess, surprise, you just found out she's a robot right now at the end of the game. Which, if you think about it, is kind of a neat twist. Like, imagine the whole time you're running through the game thinking an actual person is guiding you through these tests and puzzles, and then you break out and you get to the end only to find out, holy shit, you were a robot the whole time! Kinda changes the tone of the game, huh? So now these bits are falling off GLaDOS, and those bits start talking too, and they speak in different colors. Like, each one is its own separate color, which, again, is fine if you're not colorblind, I guess, but this really could have been solved if you had just put speaker dashes at the beginning of each character speaking. Like, just put this little dash right here, right at the start of the separate sentences. There! Now you know 2 characters are talking. Problem solved. The last little node guy is a trip, though. They didn't even bother using sound effect brackets here. Now we're using asterisks, like we're in a Java chat room in the year 1999, and he is just flipping the out.
unless you have time for this.
Like, his noises just keep going and going and going. At some point, his sound effects take up the whole caption window space. You really could have just done one singular snarls and hisses or something to that effect, but they really wanted to illustrate this little bastard was so non-stop rabid, even his captions won't shut up. But once you win the fight, there are some genuinely good sound effect descriptors. High-pitched squeal. Energy cascades. Calming wind. Crickets chirp. Crashing debris. Birds sing. Sounds echo and fade. Although there is one last line that they didn't caption at all.
Thank you for assuming the party escort submission position.
Thank you for assuming the party escort submission position. Like, that line's pretty important. You hear the clunking of a robot walking up behind you, which is not captioned either. And then they say this line, meaning you're lying there helpless on the ground and you see yourself get dragged back inside the facility. If you don't hear any of that, you don't really know why you're suddenly scooching backwards and now you're back inside the building at the end of the game, being given sequel bait for Portal 2. Credits roll and the song Still Alive starts playing. And there's really no need to caption the lyrics because the lyrics are all written on screen where you can read them for yourself. Although something notating that it's actually the start of a song playing might have been helpful here. And that's it. Those are the closed captions in the first Portal game for PC. In short, these captions were something of a mixed bag. There were some really genuinely great accessibility decisions here, with the ability to turn the captions on or off, and even the distinction between plain old subtitles or closed captions with sound effects. And a handful of the sound effect descriptions were pretty good, but different captions were displayed in different colors for seemingly little to no reason, which could be a problem for anyone with a color blindness issue. Sometimes the wrong captions appear on screen, sometimes the sound descriptions are weird or confusing, an important moment at the end of the game isn't captioned at all, and most frustratingly, the font is entirely too small and there are too many words on the screen in one given row at a time, making readability during gameplay fairly difficult. If I had to give Portal on PC a letter grade for its attempt at using closed captions to increase its accessibility, I'd have to give them a B-. There's clearly more effort made here than in a lot of other video games to make Portal accessible to an audience that might be deaf or hard of hearing, but their efforts need to be tightened up in a lot of areas if they want to be clean, clear, and readable to their whole audience. So maybe this kind of topic is only interesting to somebody like me, but well, maybe not. I know I'm not the only person who has complained about the legibility of subtitles in video games over the years, so maybe there are some games out there with this issue that have been bugging you too. Do you know any games like that? Should I talk about more of them? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Maybe we'll try this again some other time in the future.